Hello and welcome to this Storyboard special. I'm Shibani Gharat. In a market destabilized by war in Ukraine, big tech troubles, rising interest rates, cost of living crisis and a new COVID variant, what will be the outlook for 2023? We're catching up with advertising executive Sir Martin Sorrell, who's currently executive chairman at S4 Capital and former CEO of WPP, to find out his predictions for the year and how will past year's woes and opportunities shape the advertising and media landscape. Sir Martin, welcome to Storyboard.
Welcome to 2023. 2022 was a pretty tough year for many people. Generally, it was okay for S4 despite some challenges. By the end of the year, I think we will have achieved our objectives. But 2023 is going to be an interesting year, as the Chinese might say.
Yes, interesting actually is the key operative word over here. So what according to you were the key events of the past year that will have a noteworthy impact on the year 2023, Sir Martin?
Well, I think, Giovanni, the world has changed, whether we like it or not. I don't know whether it's an era of deglobalization. The last 40 years have been one where free trade, reduction of trade barriers, has stimulated growth in GDP. And as you laid out in your introduction, the challenges that we have around inflation, around higher interest rates, potential recession, stagflation, the Ukrainian war, the issues around US-China relationships, long-term issues around Russia, Iran, those are just some of them, quite apart from North Korea, the Middle East generally, and other flashpoints. All these things are really are confusing to many people when you try and sort out what's happening in 2023. But I think basically the world is fragmenting now. India may benefit from that. I'll come on to that in a second. But generally, I think we're having to, those of us who are trying to run global companies or mini global companies, as I would put it, like S4, and its operating brand Media Monks, we're having to be far more selective geographically about where we operate. So I think India is increasingly seen, along with Vietnam and Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia as a whole, Southeast Asia, as an alternative to investment in China. And those clients that have major positions in China are obviously worried about the security issues if China was to move on Taiwan in any way, shape or form over the coming years. And those with big positions probably are moderating their positions and shifting. We've seen it with Apple and Foxconn making changes in terms of their supply chains. Europe, just turning to Europe, remains a challenged region. The war in Ukraine, which looks as though it's going to go on for a significant period of time, means that security issues override a lot of investment decisions or delay a lot of investment decisions. So I think that's the situation geographically. From a functional point of view, digital companies such as S4 are bound to benefit in 23 and beyond from a speed up in digital transformation. Clients are going to have pressure on their top lines because GDP growth globally is going to be lower in 23 and 2024, maybe until the US presidential election, which may augur the beginnings of a different tempo in the real economy if a Republican administration is returned. Yeah. But until then, digital transformation and cost reduction are going to become very important. The Indian economy, in my view, will considerably outperform that. And I'm very bullish on the Indian economy in the longer run because I think it will benefit from the trends. It will become the most populous country on the planet. I think the Modi government is making significant changes to the industrial structure of India and the commercial structure of India, and that will play out to the benefit of the Indian economy over time.
So you are bullish on the India market, Sir Martin. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with Mark Reed, WPP's Mark Reed, and he said that he won't be surprised if India overtakes the UK market for WPP in the coming days. What is your say on that?
Well, I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? Because if you look at, I don't know whether he's referring to WPP's business
To
in India,
WPP, to WPP's business in India vis-a-vis UK's
or whether,
business.
or whether he's referring to the general industry. I think he referred to either. The Indian economy, as I said, will become the most populous on the planet in fairly short order, bigger than the Chinese economy. China will be the number one economy by size in time, not on a per capita basis. That will take a very long time to be the case. But the pecking order by 2050, the top 5 economies in the world will be around the US and China leading and US second. A lot of people believe that India will be the third largest economy by then. The fourth largest, I've seen predictions that Indonesia will be the fourth largest economy by 2050, followed by Germany. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But what that tells you is that Asia Pacific is becoming more and more important.
So, Martin, let's move over to the global markets from India. Of course, as you mentioned earlier, you were bullish on the India market, and India is going to be key market for several businesses in the coming days. But globally, what are the key trends, key consumer trends that you or your clients are witnessing?
Well, I think our clients are very, very focused on performance and sales. With the decline in GDP, as I said, from about 2 to 3% this year, 2022, to about 1.5 to 2% for 23, and maybe the same or a little bit more in 2024. So certainly lower levels of growth than we've been used to for the last 40 years, which have averaged well over 3%. As they face that economic climate, they're going to be very focused on performance and on activation. So what we've already seen in the tail end of 22 and going into 23 is a movement of what we call in our industry down the funnel. Maybe a little bit confusing, but what it means is that clients are becoming very much more sales orientated. Return on investment, our clients will be very focused on that, on media measurement, understanding, Shivani, what the relative merits of analog media are and what the relative merits of digital media in comparison. So getting their mix of media right in a 23 or 24 context is going to become really increasingly important. And that mirrors what's happening at the consumer level. I mean, consumers, obviously, there's been a lot of revenge spending in travel, entertainment, experiences after COVID, and people have been thirsting for contact and experience and travel and entertainment and engagement after COVID. But having said that, there are concerns about value and there are concerns about pricing. A lot of our clients, for example, during the COVID period or in the last year, as inflation has started to take hold in most developed economies, 7, 10% double-digit inflation in some, they've been pricing up. And I think clients are becoming increasingly concerned that consumers are becoming more and more sensitive to price increases. So getting the balance right between price and volume is going to be increasingly important.
So, Martin, now let's move over and speak about the future of big tech. After 2 years of high, it was not such a great year for the big tech companies, 2022. So how does the future look like? How does 2023 look like for big tech?
Well, what's interesting, Giovanni, is when you actually look at 2022 and you look at the big platforms, when I talk about the big platforms, I'm talking about the top 6 or so. So Alphabet, Google, Meta, Amazon, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance, TikTok, which are the 6 major ones. You can look at Pinterest, you can look at Snap, you can look at Twitter as well. But when you look at the big platforms, overall in 2022, they're probably going to grow by about 10%, a little bit under 10%. Now, what's interesting about the prognostications for next year is although the industry, and you referred to one of the holding companies just before, the holding companies are looking at the industry growing about, the advertising industry growing about 5 or 6% next year, with digital up about towards 10%, almost double digits, and linear or analog flat. So again, next year, although the headlines, as you quite rightly say, have been particularly focused on some of the big tech companies, such as Meta. I mean, Meta, I think unfairly, has been put at the root of all problems. All social problems are down to problems on social media, and all social media problems have been around Meta. People have overstressed the stress that big tech have been under. And I think next year, with that emphasis that I've already outlined on activation and performance, platforms such as Google and Amazon, which this year Google will probably grow by about 10 or 15%, and Amazon will be up, its advertising platform will be up by almost 30% this year. They will continue to grow next year, and you'll see a recovery in Meta. So I think rumors of the death of the digital platforms are overestimated, to say the least, and you'll see a strong recovery of the growth rates, which again, just to emphasize, those growth rates have declined, but they've still been pretty strong in 2022, and they look as though they will be pretty strong in 2023.
The larger problem which many experts were pointing out when it comes to big tech was over-ambitious hiring, and then probably a need to relook at the business models. So do you think that stands corrected?
Yeah, we ourselves suffered from that in the first half of the year, when our headcount increase, number of people in our business, was growing in excess of our revenue increase. Our revenues to the end of the third quarter of last year, you'll see our final results shortly, to the end of the third quarter, we're up by 28% and 29% in the third quarter, but we've been increasing our headcount. And the same thing, obviously on a much bigger scale, was true of some of the tech companies. They were hiring too fast, or maybe they were hiring too fast in anticipation of greater growth. Those growth rates have come down. Alphabet have reduced their hiring rates. Microsoft have, Apple have, Amazon have cut their headcounts. Meta have cut their headcounts. Netflix have cut their headcounts, as they were probably, as you say, over-ambitious. But again, I come back to the fundamentals. They're rebalanced. Now, you said, did they change their business model? I'm not sure that they've changed the business model. I think they've just altered the pace of hiring. What we saw in COVID was a rapid acceleration in digital transformation and acceptance at the consumer level, at the enterprise level, at the government level. I mean, we embraced digital communication as we were stuck at home in the COVID lockdowns, and that accelerated the pace of growth and probably concertinaed the growth in the COVID period of 20 and 21, maybe into 2022, but in a very sort of concentrated period. And what's happening now is there's been a readjustment, not I think of the business model, as you asked me, but really of the balance between hiring and growth. And in a way, S4 Capital or Media Monks, its operating brand, was a reflection of those trends too. So I think the pace of hiring has come down. And one of the big issues that all digital businesses faced in 22 and will face again in 23 is the rise of the cost of digital labor.
Yeah.
That is ameliorated for the reasons that you just touched on. As the pace of hiring has come down by the digital or tech giants, so the pressure on wage increases in the digital economy has been lessened too.
Now, moving on to new business pipelines, how does 2023 look like from the new business pipeline perspective?
Well, it's very interesting that none of the holding companies, for example, were at the Morgan Stanley conference in Barcelona in November. That's traditionally where the CEOs of the holding companies appear and give their views on what 23 might look like. But none of them showed up. And I think that indicates their shyness about making any forecasts for 23, because I think they are somewhat nervous with their analog profiles about making prognostications. Most of the analyst forecasts are forecasting that the holding companies will be flat to down next year in terms of revenues. We've just, in the process of completing our budgets, we haven't given any guidance for next year, but what we have said is the industries in which we operate, that is, the digital platforms, are going to grow next year by somewhere between 5 to 10%. And the transformation industry, in which 10% of our revenues operate, are going to grow by 15 to 20%.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
It is time for a short break. On the other side, we have Raja Rajamannar, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer, Mastercard, speaking about global sports marketing outlook and Mastercard supporting women's sports. Sharing his experience on global sports marketing and Mastercard supporting women's sports, we have Raja Rajamannar, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Mastercard, joining us today in a conversation on Storyboard. Raja, welcome to CNBC-TV18.
Thank you, Shivani. And I must also say, you're one of the very few people who have spelled my name correctly, pronounced it correctly the very first time. Thank you.
That's good to know. Tell us about Mastercard's support and association with women's cricket, and why does it interest you as a brand?
See, firstly, I think even before we talk of cricket and women's cricket, you look at the overall gender situation in the world. We have taken it as a company at Mastercard, the agenda of ensuring that there is parity between the genders. So when I joined, for example, Mastercard, most of our sponsorships were predominantly focused on sports for men. The TV campaigns were also focused in a way, when you're sponsoring, for example, a major football, there was a natural selection where probably more men were watching those. So we said both from an audience perspective as well as the events perspective, we were more biased at that time towards men. So we said we need to balance it out. So we started then going into events and various activities, which actually more women follow, either equal to or even more than men. So we started getting into various sports, various events and film festivals and music festivals and so on. Then within each area that we were already present in, we started focusing on women in that particular sport. So for example, if you look at soccer, which is obviously on everyone's top of mind with the recent World Cup, we went in with women's teams that we wanted to sponsor. So Arsenal, Olympique Lyon, National Women's Soccer League in the US. So we started getting into women's soccer. Rugby, you're absolutely right. Rugby, we have got it with women. And we got lots of very, very good brand ambassadors who are women. So taking that whole spirit along, now in the world of cricket as well, we said it's very natural for us, and keeping in our character of actually making sure that there is gender parity, we wanted to get into women's sport, in this case women's cricket as well.
Are you looking at tapping on or getting in more women consumers on board with this? What is the idea or thought behind it?
84% of all decision makers for purchases of various things at home are women. Now, I also am the president of Mastercard's healthcare business. Even in that space, more than 80% of all health givers or healthcare givers in any family, they're all women. So it is actually, it makes a tremendous amount of good sense to focus on women. We are not doing something charitable or in that whole thing. So we find it extremely ironical that that's how the situation is, and that was a realization several years back that we looked at and said it's not only an opportunity to do something good and right by the society, but it's also damn good for your business.
Yeah, and also you launched one particular campaign, Halke Mein Mat Lo, with in collaboration with BCCI. Also, your larger long-term collaboration for domestic title sponsorship. It took BCCI so many years to reach pay parity when it comes to women's cricket. Do you think sports requires that brand involvement to make that change happen?
I think it really helps a lot, right? Because many of the organizations, they actually go where consumers are. because at the end of the day, they're appealing to the fans. Where the fans are, that's where the brands go. So it's sort of kind of a vicious circle in some sense. So somebody has to break that cycle, that vicious cycle. So when a brand goes and says, it doesn't matter even if the viewership is today a little lower for the women's sport, but I'm willing to put a bet on this. I'm going to invest for the future of this particular sport for women, for example, that the associations are responding to it very well. And that's what then starts sort of moving the whole cycle, and more participants are there from a fan point of view. And once one brand jumps on, the other brands which also see the benefit, and then it catches on. So in that way, really momentum can be built. And if you look at some countries like Japan, for example, which is also in some sense a very traditional kind of a society, and where male sports dominate like anything. But when this kind of an activation has been done by brands, and if you look at in the context of women's golf, like LPGA, that's actually more watched than men's golf tournaments. So that change can absolutely be brought about, and brands can play a very significant role in that.
But Raja, your larger association with BCCI and cricket as a whole, including men's cricket, stays, I think till the end of
March.
Till the end of March. Tell us about it and Mastercard's focus on cricket.
So
in the country specifically, and how does it help?
Yeah, so cricket is not something new to us. Way back, we had got associated with, I believe, Mumbai Indians at the point in time. And we had association with many players and legends and icons of cricket. Most recently, we have still on our board MS Dhoni as our ambassador. And we have been involved in the Legends All-Star Sport, All-Star Cricket and areas like that. So we have been involved over a period of time. And also outside of India, we have been with Team Australia, we have been with the Team West Indies in the T20. So we have been sort of playing in this space. For us, at any point in time, it's a question of what is the opportunity, what is the cost of that opportunity, what are the returns for that opportunity. So we constantly keep evaluating it, because
but the cost of the opportunity for cricket in India is very high.
It is high. Therefore, you have to be very thoughtful to make sure that you're getting the return. It's not just putting about absolute dollars, but what am I getting in return for that as a brand and as a company. And this is an analysis we do constantly and always. And we look at our portfolio of assets that we want to get involved in and activate constantly. So in that scenario, we had recently had this opportunity to get in partnership with BCCI, and which is running out end of March. And right now we're evaluating all the options. What is it that makes most sense for us to reach the audience, connect with them, and establish our brand very strongly and build further relationship and trust with our customers.
Yeah. Raja, I'm going to ask you about the larger sports marketing outlook in general, but before that, FIFA Football World Cup, how will it, rewrite the sports marketing playbook for the days to come?
See, I don't think it'll rewrite the playbook, but what it will do is to rebalance the playbook. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the sport of soccer, it is one of the most affordable and accessible sports that you have. Already it is the largest sport, and I think it will get a tremendous amount of further impact. Secondly, whenever you're having new generation of kids coming up, it's very important to tap into them to keep a sport thriving into the future. All the sports are actually trying to do it, whether it is golf or whether it is tennis or whether it is ballet. You talk of whichever is the area, they are trying to tap into and inspire youngsters to get into that space. So when a huge event happens like the FIFA World Cup this time, it has got a lot of impact, particularly in the region. So my feeling is that there is going to be a significant surge of this sport in this geography. In areas like Latin America, Europe, it's already there humongously. Absolutely. Will I be shocked and surprised if also it starts taking root in India? I'll not be. The more the amount of excitement which is there in a recent event, the more number of kids would want to join that. And I think there is a momentum that builds in. Secondly, I think a lot of brands will also start participating in these programs involving children, not with a view to tap into the potential of the children today, but in terms of their potential into the future. Both for the underprivileged children, which is extremely important to give them an opportunity. For many of them, It keeps them off the bad things, and then they will start actively getting into sports and all the good things on that part of it. And it can produce some major winners as well. So I think brands will want to get involved in it. Like for example, at Mastercard, we participate in something called First Tee. This is making golf accessible to kids from underprivileged communities, and therefore they have a chance, and you'll have some fantastic talent coming out of it. So today, when most of the brands are there, if you look at them, they're not only doing something only purely for the business, they also have to do, because consumers are demanding that they do something for the social good as well. So you are doing well by doing good. In other words, you're being a force for good and also a force for growth for your company.
Yeah, and many brands are already, like supporting sports at grassroots, pushing in, newer players, newer names, newer faces, tapping into regions, different regions across the country. Also, your outlook for sports marketing in the coming months?
Live events, which include sports, is really taking off. And that's something which we will see an unprecedented level of momentum as we go into 2023. And then there are these global events that are always there, whether it is in terms of the next year, it's going to be the year for the Rugby World Cup, as an example. That's going to have a tremendous amount of momentum in some countries where rugby is more popular, and so on. So each one of these is really coming up with a huge resurgence, and that's very encouraging, because that also gives marketers more opportunities to be able to connect with consumers. And if a company like Mastercard, which is an experiential marketing company more than an advertising company, so to speak, what happens is it gives us more opportunities to curate and create those priceless experiences that are truly once in a lifetime. So we are looking at it with a lot of optimism and hope.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your insights and speaking to us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
With that, it's a wrap on Storyboard this week. You can catch all of our content on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.